We need to be here. I really appreciate everybody being out here. And I want to echo Robert's point that this is really a bunch of extremists on this position. Trump's nominations are out of touch with the mainstream of the United States. They're far on the fringe on this issue. So I've been studying climate change for 25 years, and the evidence just gets stronger and worse. And I want to keep it simple and bring it home. In Rhode Island, things are changing. Yes, we have a few cold days a year, but that number is way down. The number of extreme heat days is way up. For example, we did a little analysis where we just counted the number of days over 80 degrees heat index at TF Green Airport. And it's gone from about 54 in the 50s and 60s, that is days per year over 80. In the 70s, 80s, it was 60. In the 90s and the 2000s, it was 64. And now it's up 71, 72, 86. In other words, we have 3 more weeks of summer than we used to have. That is, hot summer days. And it's important because emergency room visits go up anytime the temperature goes above 80 degrees heat index. The sea level is rising. Rhode Island has coastal properties, some of our most historic properties, a lot of vulnerable people also, and a lot of valuable property. Some of our municipalities, something like a quarter of their tax revenue comes from the first line of houses along the shore.
Where you're standing right now is 10 feet above sea level.
Yeah, and you can see the flood signs around the, when you've seen those photos of the square here, when the trolleys were up to their ceilings in water during the hurricanes. Storms will be stronger, and they'll be coming on a higher sea level, on a higher tide. Right now, the Newport tide gauge is about 10 inches higher than it was in 1930, and it's rising faster than it's been. What else? Flooding events are happening from the rainfall as well. It's already up 30%, and it's predicted to rise. More intense storms, more intense droughts. So the weather is getting unpredictable, and it's getting worse. Now, as Robert also said, it's the poor and the vulnerable who are suffering the impacts and who have caused it the least of all. And I think there was an article in the New York Times yesterday by Nicholas Kristof, which is exactly the climate justice paradox. That is, those who didn't cause the problem are those who are suffering the most. In his case, he was talking about Africa. And it really shows the importance of all of our federal agencies in addressing the problem. So there's 2 ways we have to address it. At home, and then to help those abroad as well, who are the most vulnerable. So we need policies that are helping the vulnerable people, including by our contributions to USAID, to the United Nations, through the Green Climate Fund and so on. The Trump administration has, entering administration has, he's promised to cut funding for all UN programs, for withdrawing himself from the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement is a very good deal for the United States. It really is not binding in any way. But if we pull out of this thing, the rest of the world will stop doing what needs to be done. And so and especially countries that are less wealthy than us, and we're less responsible. The US is responsible for about 1/4 of all global warming. Why? Because carbon dioxide stays up there for 100 years. Methane, which we're increasingly emitting, warms the climate by 20, 80, or 100 times worse than carbon dioxide, and that's from fracking, natural gas leaks, and from landfills and all sorts of stuff. So we need a strong foreign policy on climate change. So we need this nominee Rex Tillerson from Exxon Corporation to support a treaty that his corporation actually has been actively undermining for decades. In 1997, when the Kyoto Protocol was on the table, Exxon was a funder, both publicly and then increasingly secretly, to climate denial groups. One was called the Global Climate Coalition. There's been memos leaked to the New York Times and so on that show the active collaboration of these corporations to create think tanks to hype up the science of a very few scientists compared to thousands and thousands who say that this is a real problem. And so the Exxon Corporation knew about climate change in 1978. Their own scientists know this, and yet they buried it. And Rex Tillerson has worked at only one place in his lifetime, the corporation has said some good things. I think it's important to acknowledge those things. That is that climate change is an important issue. They're saying they support a carbon tax, but however, they're sort of doing that in a way that's not moving us towards any resolution on this issue. So at home, the EPA is our prime agency for dealing with climate change. And we'll hear some more from a former EPA employee over 7 administrations. EPA is, of course, the lead agency on the Clean Power Plan, which was the way that we were going to, state by state, come up with emissions reductions of 26 to 28% in the U.S. By 2025. Which actually, if you do the math, it's not nearly that much because it's on a different baseline than everybody else is using. In other words, it's not really very extreme at all. We should be doing much better than that. And yet, it looks like Scott Pruitt, as the nominee, would roll it back. That is, he has said, and he's actually led a lawsuit, right, by the state attorney generals, the Republican attorney generals, to roll back the Clean Power Plan, which will make it really impossible for the U.S. to meet its targets. It will require the states that care about this stuff to do more. And so I guess that's kind of my last message here, is that we can do a lot more here in Rhode Island on these issues, and we'll need to keep fighting through this whole administration to do more to address climate change. But we need agencies to do their part, including the Energy Department, right? The Energy Department is key as well. With Rick Perry as a possible head of that agency, he's a climate change denier. And he said, he was the one who didn't even remember the name of the agency when he was asked about what are those 3 agencies that you would eliminate. So we have really kind of arsonists have been appointed for a couple of these key agencies to protect our environment. So I'm going to leave it there. I would say look at the smog blog. The Guardian has a nice listing of these nominees and what their positions are. So I would hope that everybody will take a look, get yourselves informed. We're asking the senators to oppose some of the worst of these nominees. So I think they really need to hear from all of us, and so I appreciate everybody coming out today. Thanks.
Thank you.